Shoop-Shoop, Diddy-Wop, Cumma-Cumma, Wang-Dang, the New Zealand new wave track that became a worldwide hit from Montevideo and the Cassettes. With me is the man behind Monte, Murray Grindlay, one of New Zealand's music legends. Murray, thank you for coming on Revenge of the 80s Radio with us.
It's a pleasure, Chris.
Murray, you've spanned the musical spectrum as a rocker, a new waver, comic composer, writer, and creator of popular ad jingles. We're going to talk about all of that. But let's start from the beginning. You were raised in Scotland, then moved to Auckland, New Zealand.
That's right.
Now, little did anyone know the course of music history might have been changed. You might have been a UK rocker. But what brought you and your family to New Zealand as a teen?
Well, I came here when I was 13 years old, and it was because of my father. He was transferred here. He was an instrument engineer, and he had a choice. We could have gone to South Africa, we could have gone to Brazil, or we could have gone to New Zealand. And they chose New Zealand, my parents, because it seemed the most like home. And that's how that happened. Brazil could have been interesting, but anyway, I'm a Kiwi.
Well, it must have been a long plane flight, I'll tell you that.
Well, we sort of came through the east and spent a lot of time up in the east as well, so it was fantastic for me, like, I mean, for a 13-year-old boy who'd never really been out of Scotland to suddenly be in Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur, Singapore. So we spent quite a time. So it was sort of a leisurely trip, really.
At least that eased up on the potential culture shock.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, like, New Zealand's a fabulous place. I don't know if you've ever been here, but it's really fantastic. And we moved to a place called St. Heliers in Auckland, which is a little beach village. And you can imagine my glee, when I arrived here and the sun was shining and people were walking around with no shoes, which was one of the things that impressed me most at the time, like people walk around in their bare feet over here. It's fabulous.
Well, New Zealand is one place I would really like to go to.
Well, you'll have someone to visit if you do.
Oh, that would be very nice. Would love to do that. Maybe jam a little bit. Bring the dogs, Well,
bring the Dachshunds.
I was hoping that your baseball team would make the World Baseball Classic. They came very close.
Oh, really? I didn't even realize we had a baseball team, because over here the big game is rugby.
That's true. Of course, your soccer team did rather well. The All Whites.
Yes, I'm aware of the soccer team. Yes, they're pretty sharp.
Yeah, the All Whites made a very good impression in the last World Cup. But
nice one.
What got you into music, though?
Music, well, I sort of knew that I wanted to be a musician since about the age of 9 or 10. Well, in fact, there's a story that my mum tells me. I'd be in Scotland, I'd be standing on the coal bunker, because in Scotland you had the coal bunker in the back garden. And I'd be standing on the coal bunker, apparently, yelling out to my Auntie Eileen, Auntie Eileen, Auntie Eileen, think of a stage name for me. I always wanted to be a musician.
Chris Cordani here with Murray Grindlay on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Murray, we mentioned before, you really went across the musical spectrum, and that got me curious to wonder, who were your musical influences in the early years?
Well, in the early years, when I was a boy, it was people like the Everly Brothers, Roy Orbison, Elvis, Cliff Richards. I mean, he was big in Britain at the time. People like that. Just loved that stuff. And then a little bit later on, of course, when I got to about 15 or 16, I discovered the blues. And I sort of discovered the blues through the English connection, really, like people like John Mayall, who I was a big fan of, Eric Clapton, etc. And that sort of turned me on to the people that they were listening to, which was people like Muddy Waters. Howlin' Wolf would be my absolute favorite.
The 60s in the U.S. and the U.K. were a very interesting musical scene. What was the music scene like in New Zealand back then?
Well, it was much the same as around the rest of the world, really. Just a much smaller place, but we used to get all the latest records, like it was much the same as what happened in Liverpool and places like that, because Auckland's a port. So, of course, you would have the sailors coming in with all the new records. And that's basically how we heard people like Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and J.B. Lemoir and people like that,
Now, the name Murray Grindlay is synonymous with the band The Underdogs, considered one of the great blues bands out of New Zealand.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, we were kids, you know, like, I mean, it was different from what was happening in England, because you look at John Mayall and Clapton and people like that, I mean, like, they were much older than us. I mean, 4 or 5 years older, which was a big thing when you're 16, you know. So we were trying to emulate them, but like, we were incredibly young, you know.
It takes a mature musician to play the blues as effectively as the Underdogs did, and you did lead a reformation of the group. How did you guys kind of reach into yourselves to play that kind of music?
Well, I'm blowed if I know. We were just fans, you know, and we just loved it, and we were pretty well the only blues band in New Zealand, really, I think. Most of the others, there's a couple of great bands. There was a marvelous band called the La-Di-Das, but they were like a rhythm and blues band, whereas we were more just a straight blues band.
Maybe.
You know, like, it was 12-bar blues all night, you know, like, most of the tunes lasted for about half an hour or so, you know.
Well, musically, maybe, yes. You had a little bit of the early punk in you as well, mainly in your choice of what to do during appearances on television, your dress, fireman's jackets, dry ice, a lot of stuff like that.
Wow, how did you know about that, Chris? That's incredible. Yeah, we used to, we were shockers. We used to, well, you know, like, we used to have swastikas, you know, iron crosses, fireman's jackets, and we were regulars on a pop program here called the Come On Show. And the producer loved us because every time we appeared, the phones rang hot with complaints. You know, people used to complain about us quite a lot, you know, especially old chaps, you know, who'd sort of been in the war and saw these cheeky young buggers out there with, you know, like, wearing all that stuff. But I mean, but the same thing's happening in England, you know, except it was Eric Clapton and people like that were doing it, who, of course, as I've said, were older than us, but they were wearing the iron crosses and the fireman's jackets as well. And I suppose that's who we were influenced by.
I suppose if younger people do it, maybe the older generation doesn't love it so much.
No, but, you know, like, it was a lot of fun, you know, like, we had a great time, you know.
After the Underdogs, Murray, you joined a band called Cruise Lane, and you also work with a group called Brew.
Yeah, we myself and the bass player, Mike Wilson, really good friend of mine, we joined Cruise Lane, and we played in a club in Auckland called the Embers, which was the best club Auckland's ever seen, probably. It was a fabulous club, completely music orientated. I mean, the stage had a grand piano, a Hammond organ, I mean, like a B3, you know, and I mean, in those days, well, even now, it would be very unusual to find that. And so that was fantastic. Then the Brew, yes, I joined them. Actually, I think I joined the Brew before Cruise Lane, actually. And we changed our name to the Australasian Blues Champions. Ridiculous name, but that's what we changed it to. And we rehearsed for a year and didn't do one gig. Not one gig. No one would hire us. But it was a good band, and the reason I joined it was that two of the guys in the band were a lot older than me. I mean, like 20 years older than me, at least. And one of them was an American chap called Bob Gillette, who is still living here in Auckland. He lives on Waiheke Island. And Bob was a master musician, and a lot of the knowledge that I have about music, I learned from Bob. Bob taught me an awful lot.
Chris Cordani here. Straight ahead, we'll play more from Murray Grindlay, talk about the Montevideo character, and what Murray's doing today. Sitting in the Rain, an early classic from the Underdogs, with Murray Grindlay, my guest, on lead vocals. Murray, the new wave scene was a budding one in New Zealand. Much like your neighbors to the west, it gave opportunities for those musicians who wanted to play something a little bit different. The New Zealand new wave scene spawned the likes of Me-Sex, The Politicians, Split Enz, Dave and the Dynamos. But you launched a rather interesting project in 1982 under the name Montevideo and the Cassettes.
the Montevideo thing was it was unusual how it happened. I was writing the song at home one day, Shoop-Shoop, Diddy-Wop, Cumma-Cumma, Wang-Dang, and I was doing it in a sort of a New Orleans feel, sort of like I'll just sing you a little bit. It was sort of like a Shoop-Shoop, Diddly-Wop, Cumma-Cumma, Wang-Dang, Shoop, like a Dr. John or a Lee Dorsey sort of a feel. And this really good friend of mine, Mark Ekman, came round and he heard me playing and he said, "Shit, that's a really catchy song, Muzz, but look, you're doing it all wrong." And I said, "Well, how do you mean?" He said, "You should be doing it a bit more English, like do it English and do it like that Bill Wyman thing, Just Wheeze and Rock style." And I thought, that's not a bad idea. And then he looked at me and he said, "And by the way, I have a name for you even." I said, "Oh my God, what is it?" He said, "Montevideo and the Cassettes." So I went, "Oh, okay." So we went off and recorded it. And of course I use an English accent in it, and like I'm not English, like I'm Scottish, but he was determined it should be English. And then what we did was we somehow managed to get signed by Michael Gudinski, who had Mushroom Records in those days. Now, they were based in Australia. So the record was released in Australia before it was actually released in New Zealand. And it was a hit in Australia. It was number one in every state of Australia except Victoria. The Victorians didn't want a bone of us, but like it was number one everywhere else. And what used to happen? I mean, like it was an absolute scam that we pulled. Like it was because the Australians assumed that we were an English act, and I used to sit at home. And we'd set up interviews with Australian radio stations, and we led them to believe that Montevideo, who of course was English, was actually travelling out of England at the time, and he just happened to be in New Zealand this week, and you could have an interview with him because he was coming to Australia soon to do concerts, which of course was absolute lies, And like Mark Ekman, who I mentioned, who sort of came up with the whole thing, he used to write me a page of bull, really. I mean, lies that I used to tell them. I mean, like we told them that Ringo Starr was on drums on the track.
Yeah, how'd you get them to believe that?
I mean,
one?
Just absolute nonsense, And it was really funny, And they swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. And it wasn't till much later that they found out who I actually was, and it was front page, well, in some funny little paper, it was front page news, Montevideo exposed, New Zealand jingle writer. So it was really funny. And then it came back to New Zealand through Australia, and of course everyone here knew exactly who I was. So, and then what else happened? Oh, yeah, we actually got signed by Geffen Records in America. And Tommy Mottola wanted to manage us, It was just getting out of hand. And I got a call from a good friend of mine up in America, expat, Barry Coben, who used to manage Split Ends and people like that. And Barry said, "Murray, you won't believe it. I've just been to Geffen's office on Sunset Strip, and there's pictures of Monte all over the walls. People are walking around wearing little fake moustaches, just like Monte's, and smoking these pink cigarettes that we had made." It was, but then, probably for the best, it didn't go off in America, like it wasn't a big hit in America. My excuse would be it was possibly a bit too English for them, but it was looking pretty funny for a while there.
Well, maybe the bow ties weren't as readily available in the U.S. as they might have been somewhere else.
Well, possibly, but I mean, like it looked like it was all on there for a minute, but then it just sort of petered out,
The character was kind of neat. The slick back hair, the mustache, as you mentioned, the bow tie, the cool gray suit. Gotta love the cool suit.
Yeah, and of course, the other thing that we had in the clip, I mean, you must have noticed, I mean, like, they're all drag queens, you know. It was pretty risque. I mean, like, we were looking for dwarfs as well, but we couldn't find any dwarfs, so we just settled for the drag queens. But
well, the drinks, the everything else, it was a really funny video, and my favorite part of it was when you were singing with a cigarette in your mouth.
Well, yes, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. My God. Very Keith Richards.
It was quirky, it was funny, but the rest of the album was actually very good too.
Thanks.
All Night Long was fast. It was the harmonies were good from your backup singers, and the balloon scratch was pretty funny as well. But I also liked the second track, "Who's Calling." It was it dealt with paranoia and people calling in the middle of the night and annoyances.
Who's Calling was actually my favorite track. It was the third single to go out, and it did absolutely nothing. just like the second single, which was Sheba Shishashu.
That's right. Don't tell your mommy.
Yes. It was so funny. Actually, if you ever see the clip to that, that's funny. It's a really funny clip there.
I actually tried out for my high school jazz band by using the horn solo. Now, I played the valve trombone for the band, so I used the horn solo from Who's Calling.
Yes, which we put through a ring modulator. That's why it sounds so unusual, you know.
Well, the band teacher was going, "Chris, what the heck is that?" I said, "It's a horn
really
solo."
Funny. I can't believe this was happening in America. That's fantastic.
Chris Cordani here, Montevideo. Murray Grindlay is with me. That's right, Murray Grindlay, the man behind Montevideo and the Cassettes. Before we get to the movies and your new business, Murray, I did notice that you were part of a contest involving covers of Shoop-Shoop, Diddy-Wop, Cumma-Cumma, Wang-Dang in 2002. A group called Spatial Verb did quite a good job. I saw the video.
It was great, I thought, and it was so funny because they even tried to do the video kind of the same as us, and they sort of had a guy who, well, he didn't look like me, but he was doing his best to, you know.
He had the cool suit, and the transvestites were exquisite.
That was cool.
You were a part of this project?
No, I didn't know anything about it until I saw it.
So, what were your thoughts on that?
Oh, I loved it. I thought, God, yeah, I mean, fantastic. You know, it was really funny.
Murray, in addition to rocker and hitmaker, you've been a much sought-after composer and jingle writer. You wrote music for movies, including Sleeping Dogs and Once Were Warriors. That and jingle writing have been more of your career than rock.
Well, yes, you see, because I sort of became a jingle writer in about 1972. Because, wow, you know, like, I just got married, and I would have been about 21, 22. And I was just sitting there, and I thought, my God, I mean, like, I was working in a pub at the time with Cruise Lane, actually, and earning a very meager amount of money. And I'd sort of sung a couple of jingles for other composers, and I just thought to myself, how hard can this be? And I thought, I've got to make some money out of music. I have to find a way to earn a good living out of music. So I just sort of packed up my Mari kit bag that I had at the time with some demos of my songs, and I went around all the advertising agencies, and it was a case, I think, of being in the right place at the right time, you know, because like over here, it was almost like we sort of invented the medium, really, because all the jingles up until that point that you would have heard in New Zealand were all sort of hard sell, sort of what you'd expect from a jingle, you know. And I went in with the sort of outlook like, no, we shouldn't do them like jingles, we should do them like songs. And they went for it. And I'm still doing it today.
That was a very innovative approach back in the 70s, and it's now the norm today. I guess you must have started the trend.
Well, over here I did, yeah.
Let's put this into perspective, Murray. You're considered jingle royalty over there. Fans can check out some of your recent work on your website. You've written thousands of ad tunes. In fact, Your jingles have been revered to the point where greats like Stevie Ray Vaughan and Taj Mahal worked alongside you.
Well, that's right. It was a great thrill to work with people like that. Well, I mean, like I met some of my heroes, I mean, my goodness, and actually had them in the studio. I mean, Taj Mahal has become a very close friend. I've done about five jingles with Taj over the years, and he's a fabulous man, fabulous character. And of course, Stevie Ray Vaughan, well, I mean, he was just something else. He came over. It was for Europa, which was a New Zealand petrol. And in those days, it wasn't uncommon for us to make 4-minute commercials, and they would be shown on TV with very little product in them. I mean, like the Europa one, well, you wouldn't have known it was about petrol until the very last shot where they actually showed the logo. And the scam that I came up with was I called it Traveling On. And boy, Stevie was a thrill, I mean, unfortunately, it was just before he died, actually, like he died probably about 6 months later in that bloody plane crash or helicopter, whatever it was. But he was the loveliest man. I mean, like he came into the studio, I gotta tell you, I mean, like he came into the studio and I had 6 different amplifiers for him because I wasn't sure what he'd want. I mean, like, would he want a Fender? Would he want a Marshall or a Boogie? And he came in and he looked at all these amps, and in his real sort of laconic southern drawl, he said, "Well, Murray, what I usually do is hook them all up." so like I called down the boffin from upstairs, and he came down, he hooked them all up. And then I watched Stevie. He went right along all of the amplifiers with his hand, and he just put every knob on every amplifier on full. Bass, treble, everything was on full, And then he hit a note. And my pal and I, that I worked with, a chap called Murray McNabb, we honestly, it hurt. This note that he hit, it was so loud, it was beyond loud. It was, I mean, it really hurt. So, like, we ran out of the room screaming, going, "Jeez!" And old Stevie was just standing there looking nonplussed right in front of the amps going, "What? What's wrong with these guys?" Like it didn't worry him at all, but God, it was loud. But then he proceeded to play a fabulous guitar solo. Oh God, it was, like it was amazing. I mean, that man was one hell of a guitar player.
So in effect, you actually put together a music video, and then maybe later on, it just shows the product.
Yeah. Well, the chap that did the video was a chap called Jeff Dixon, who was a marvelous filmmaker, marvelous film director, and he actually sort of put it together. And what we did was myself and Midge Marsden are both in it, and we traveled New Zealand for about 2 weeks with Stevie Ray, and we just had a little convoy of cars and trucks, and we used to just stop wherever Jeff thought we could do something, And so, like, I had the pleasure of being with Stevie Ray Vaughan for about 2 weeks, actually traveling New Zealand with him. And, oh God, it was fantastic. Like he had the only ride